Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed, my co-moderators for the 69th weekly meeting that we've had in a row. And we created this forum to bring together people of many different ideologies, many different religions and nations in order to unite humanity to create true peace. That there's been too much division amongst various different peace organizations. And if we actually want to stop thermonuclear war, which is on the verge right now as we're talking, we need to unite all of humanity to make this happen. So thank you again for joining us. We're broadcasting over multiple platforms right now. Just to give you a sense of how we're going to do this outline, we have speakers who will do a beginning portion, the first hour or so, and then we'll have a general discussion period with members of the audience, people who are part of the Zoom meeting. If you'd like to be part of the Zoom meeting to discuss with the speakers, you must register for this event. You'll find that link in the description of the YouTube channel. If you're on a different platform, not YouTube or Rumble, please go to the schillerinstitute.com and it'll be the first item on the webpage and register there. So with that, thank you all for joining us at this very prescient moment to bring all of our forces together. I'd like to have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition, to start us off. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, hello to all of you. I think we are in an extremely dangerous situation, which has many elements to it. But I think maybe the most obvious one, even if it may not be the worst one, the most obvious one is the change which occurred in the last several days in the Russian nuclear doctrine. Obviously, in reaction to the ongoing, steps by NATO in the context of the Ukrainian war, and more talks about the need to put Ukraine in control of the long-range missiles, allowing them to do strikes deep into the territory of Russia, which was the subject of discussion in a meeting between British Prime Minister Starmer and Biden. I think it was on September 13th, where Starmer had come with a list of targets such missiles should be targeted in Russia. Now, at that point, President Biden did not sign on to this, and it seems that there is a huge brawl in the background of the Biden administration, where the Pentagon is trying to restrain the situation, because as many times the military are more acutely aware of the consequences of certain actions than the so-called civilians. And it seems that at least for the time being, the State Department lost in this battle. So Biden has not yet allowed the Ukrainians to use American missiles for such strikes deep into the territory of Russia. This was also reiterated by Kirby yesterday. So nevertheless, it seems that the Russian government does not trust that this statement by Biden is cut in cement, because nevertheless, President Putin announced a couple of days ago a change in the nuclear doctrine of Russia, which so far was that Russia would use nuclear weapons only if the territory of the Russian Federation would be threatened. And now this is changed by saying if there would be a massive aerospace attack coming from a non-nuclear country, massive, large number of drones, missiles, cyber attacks, and if such a non-nuclear country would be backed by a nuclear power, they would regard this as a joint attack and therefore preserve the right to use nuclear weapons against the aggressor. Now, that is very, very clearly a signal, if there can be any signal to stop this extremely dangerous path towards Armageddon. I don't know what else people need. However, it seems that the Western media are, again, most of them just treating that as, oh, Putin is threatening with nuclear weapons once again, totally underplaying the absolute difference in, the nuclear doctrine by Russia, which has been just adopted. And it seems that also President Zelensky, who is in the United States in the context of the UN General Assembly, somehow continued to talk as if such a change has not been made. And when he met with a bipartisan group of senators, basically presenting his so-called victory plan, it was not very clear how that victory should be achieved, given the dramatic losses of Ukraine on the battlefield. Essentially, what became public of it is that Zelensky is demanding more F-16 and the right to use the Anglo-American long-range missiles for deep strikes into Russian territory. And according to Zelensky, this, if it is guaranteed, would then force Russia to the negotiation table latest by next year. And that way the war could be ended swiftly. But again, it's as if the change in the nuclear doctrine did not happen. Now, that is a situation which is obviously extremely dangerous, because it's not just, that if the Pentagon thinks they have the situation under control, that is one thing, but how quickly a mistake can happen, a misjudgment, a human error, a technical failure, a misreading of the situation. So we should be, in super alarm about this situation. But unfortunately, this is not the only one. The other one naturally is what is happening in the Middle East, where since a couple of days, the Israeli attack on Lebanon and Hezbollah has started, with already a significant number of casualties, and with the possibility and all preparation having been done for a ground invasion of the Israeli armed forces into Lebanon. Now, Netanyahu, who also has arrived in the United States for the UN General Assembly, according to various reports, privately hinted that he may agree to the US-French proposal to have a 21-day ceasefire. But publicly, he said exactly the opposite. He said, that Israel will strike Hezbollah full force and not stop until the goal is achieved, resonating the horrible happenings in the Gaza so far. Now, Jake Sullivan from the National Security Council basically said, the United States must take steps so that the situation is being prevented of spilling out of control. But naturally, if there is a full assault with the aim to wipe out Hezbollah, the aim is obviously to draw Iran into the conflict. And if that happens, practically all stops potentially are out. And if it would come to the use of nuclear weapons in the Middle East, this would be even more dangerous than the immediate situation in Ukraine. We were talking to some military sources in Europe who actually are warning that they regard the immediate danger of the use of nuclear weapons for higher in the Middle East than even in the Ukraine situation. So obviously, this is another extremely tense and super dangerous situation. Unfortunately, again, not the only one, because the real crisis, or the geopolitical confrontation between the United States and China, is the other extremely worrisome aspect. And Undersecretary of State Kurt Campbell, a couple of days ago, testified in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House, where he made a speech which is quite incredible, basically because it could not be more, amazing how a geopolitical spectacle blinds people from seeing what is actually going on. Because what Campbell said is that China is the greatest threat in the history of the United States ever, that it pales the threats in the Cold War, and that what is the threat about China is not just the military, but technology and the global south, or the impact of China in the global south. Now, he also said that, much harsher measures are required also from the Europeans against China. And he lamented that the focus on Ukraine and the Middle East is hindering the full-fledged focus on China and the Indo-Pacific. Now, I want to say this. The whole line that China is a threat to the United States is a lie which must not stand, because China, and the history of China is the proof of it, is not an aggressive country. It does not try to replace the United States as the hegemon. It's not an imperialistic orientation, but China is, doing what is the absolute right of every sovereign country on the planet. It is developing its own people, it's developing science and technology, and it is helping the global south to overcome the remnants of colonialism. And it has an incredible success, because contrary to the NATO narrative, which people have to believe, or else they have to face all kinds of threats, fines and various negative things, China is relatively unspectacular, helping countries in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia to develop, to overcome poverty and underdevelopment by providing them infrastructure, industry, agriculture, helping them with education, with health, with all kinds of things. And as a result, naturally, many countries of the global south regard China and the BRICS as their friends. I can just say I came back from a trip to Shandong, where I participated last week in the International Peace Day, which was organized in Shandong with a large group of people from all over the world. And, it was a mixture between, celebrations of various accomplishments. We visited a lot of factories, farms, various things. And, I can only say I was in China the first time in 1971, that is in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. And the difference between the poverty in 71, which I have seen firsthand, and I don't need any books and secondary sources. I have been in China repeatedly since, and I have seen with my own eyes what a gigantic civilizational contribution China has made by applying science and technology to their own economy, and now providing it as an aid to developing countries. So therefore, and I have seen how representatives of these countries are, relating to China, regarding it as a friend. So the whole idea that, China is a threat is just not true. It would be extremely easy to resolve this whole situation if, the West, starting with the United States and European countries, would stop this geopolitical confrontation and respond to the Chinese version of my proposal to have a new security and development architecture, because China has promoted a global security initiative, a global development initiative, and a global civilizational initiative, which is just another way of saying that we need a new security and development architecture and a renaissance of the dialogue of civilizations. They formulated different, but it's exactly what we have been promoting as the way out of this crisis. If the West would say, we cooperate, we stop the fight for supremacy, we agree that the world is a multipolar world, and we move from confrontation to cooperation, all these conflicts would virtually evaporate overnight. Because if the large powers, the United States and China, and by that token, Russia, would enter such a mode of cooperation, all regional conflicts would be immediately extremely manageable. So the way out is very, very clear. And I can only say the International Peace Coalition is mobilizing to educate people that there is a way out. The threat is enormous. It is breathtaking, but the way out of the situation would be relatively easy. Now, let me just mention one last aspect of this picture, and that is that right now you have a very broad effort, especially in Germany, by NATO and certain Bundeswehr circles to basically prepare the population for the coming war with NATO. And, as Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank, who is the head of the NATO Joint Support and Enabling Command, just is putting out daily, that people have to be prepared for the transport of large numbers of wounded from the East Front back to European countries. And Pistorius, the German defense minister, wants to make the German society war ready, preaching the same thing, that the war with Russia is inevitable in the latest by 2029, and that all institutions of Germany must be prepared for the coming war, including the Red Cross, learning how to transport these large numbers of wounded people. This is absolute psychosis, and we have to get the population away from this sort of brainwashing, because this can easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, in a few days, I think on the 12th of October, President Biden will make his last visit to Germany as president, and he will preside over the Rammstein group. Obviously, the topic will be more support for weapons for Ukraine and similar things. And, there are already many, many people waking up to, the danger we are in, especially if the plans of putting long-range or middle-range US missiles onto Germany, on German territory, starting in 2026, without any say of the Germans. They were not asked if they want these weapons. They are not asked how these weapons should be deployed. If they ever are deployed, they have no say in the decision. And people are waking up. There is now an open letter circulating to Biden. Large demonstrations are being prepared for the 3rd of October. And that is one of the things what we absolutely have to mobilize people for, because the problem is that the general population still has no clue in what acute danger we find ourselves. Otherwise, I think we need to mobilize to really take to the streets, get large numbers of people to the streets to protest this, and more fundamentally, to work internationally to get the new security and development architecture on the agenda. And that is what we should be discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helga, for that opening. I think that is very important to get the discussion going for what we're doing here today and the mobilizing that we're doing. Thank you. So next, I'd like to have Glenn Deason, who is a commentator, professor, and author. He's been on here before, and he has an excellent analysis, which personally I appreciate very, very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Deason, for joining us.
My pleasure. So I thought I would mention some of my thoughts around this new nuclear doctrine, which Russia is adopting, because the former doctrine they had was, well, very restricted. They can use nuclear weapons either in the retaliation to a nuclear attack, or second, if there's a threat to their existence through conventional means. But what they're doing now is effectively as a result of this proxy war, in which they see that their deterrent has been weakened. And I think this is a reasonable assessment, also accepted in the West. As we open any Western newspaper, what do we see? Oh, well, Russia doesn't even respond to its red lines anymore. Surely we can do anything we want. We can start bombing within Russia. They would never dare to strike back, because that would be suicidal. Also, we cannot be held hostage to their nuclear blackmail, which is how we refer now to nuclear deterrence. So for this reason, there's been a huge push for how Russia can restore its deterrent. They've been pursuing this horizontal escalation, where they send the warships to, towards Cuba, sending now air defense systems to Iran. They're doing arms deals with North Korea, but none of this is seen to be accepted as a tit for tat in the West. So we continue to escalate, and now it's kind of pushed it to this limit where they're now looking at how to restore their deterrent. And I would argue it's two main reasons. Two important aspects of this new deterrent. The first is, if it's an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state, backed by a nuclear power, this will be then considered a joint attack. So for example, if now Ukraine begins to hail Moscow full of missiles or drones, this will be then considered an attack by the United States as well, and Russia will respond accordingly. And the second is an attack on Belarus, which is they share a union state with the Russians. If they attack Belarus, that will also be considered an attack on Russia. So I can just briefly talk about these two issues. And as I said, the first one is really a response to this what it sees as decline in its deterrent. Simply because, as we've seen over the past 2.5 years, the informal rules of proxy war in terms of what we do to each other has been broken by the US and its allies. So for example, this didn't used to be controversial, that supplying F-16s was not something you would do in a proxy war. In Biden's own words, we can't supply F-16s. That would mean World War III. Well, now we do, and it's not considered problematic at all. So this is a good point in terms of why Russia's deterrent has been weakening, and now we've been increasing this. We support the use of weapons inside Russian territory. When the Ukrainians invaded Kursk with Western weapons, kidnapped and executed civilians, this was also no criticism from the West. Even when Ukraine hit Russian early nuclear warning system with drones, not once but twice, there's no real opposition coming from the West. So all rules seem to have been broken. And it's important to see how the Russians view this as a proxy war as well, because they feel they're in a position where the United States can simply strike at Russia through a third party, and they can't fight back. So this is the problem they want to address. And this goes back also to the Istanbul peace agreement in early 2022. Keep in mind, this is when the Russians and Ukrainians were close to an agreement, but it was sabotaged. And as the mediators at that time, both the Turkish foreign minister as well as the former Israeli prime minister confirmed this, that the US and UK saw an opportunity to effectively kill Russians and weaken Russia as a strategic rival. So in their words, they had an opportunity to fire at Russia while Russia couldn't fire back at them. So again, fight through a Ukrainian proxy. Now, so they ended up in this position where they had hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians armed by NATO, which could fight Russia. And if the fighting then would only go one way, given that NATO would be safe space. So the problem was, if it would have been stagnant, it would have been one thing. But over time, we saw that Ukraine began to lose in this war of attrition. And every time Ukraine begins to lose, NATO responds by escalating. That means heavier weapons, deeper strikes into Russia. And this is why we've seen one red line being breached after another. And that's why this last new argument that we should supply this long-range precision missiles. This is seen as being a clear step across a red line which hasn't been broken to the same extent before, because these missiles would be operated by the United States, its soldiers and technicians. It would be guided by American satellites, and of course, being American missiles. So this would be, yeah, they would launch it from Ukraine, but that would be a formality. This is seen as the United States directly attacking Russia. So that's why President Putin made this argument very clear. If you go down this path, that will be considered NATO attack on Russia, and we will retaliate. This was his argument. And of course, it's, I know these days we have to demonize Russia and we can't show any empathy for their position. But imagine if it was the other way around, like used, for example, the example of Syria, as United States illegally occupies. They have a right to defend themselves. But imagine if Russia would help them defend themselves. They would take some of Russian missiles to Syria, operated by Russians, guided by Russian satellite systems, and they would begin bombing New York or Washington, D.C., all under the guise that we're just helping Syria. Would the United States accept this? Well, of course not. They would consider this to be a direct attack by the Russians, and reasonably so. And that's why also the Russians see the same thing now. And of course, we can take that analogy further. Imagine then the US threatening nuclear retaliation, and the Russians would say, well, we can't be hostage to nuclear saber rattling. Syria has a right to defend itself. This is kind of the path we're on, where we're walking towards nuclear war, and we're making this foolish moralistic argument why we can't steer away. Now, luckily, it appears that there are some people putting a brake on this. And so this is my main argument why the nuclear deterrent has to be restored. And the second, of course, is this issue of a nuclear attack on Belarus, because whenever you go up the escalation ladder, you can do heavier and heavier weapons. But as during the Cold War, if the US and the Soviet Union wouldn't attack each other directly, there's always the middle step where you can attack an ally. And this is why it's, Belarus sees itself as exposed. As we knew several months ago, the Russians transferred nuclear weapons to Belarus, which was aimed to work as a deterrent. But again, this is not seen as, well, the West isn't deterred anymore, so then they have to escalate this as well. And I have a report here actually from The Atlantic in 2022, in which they wrote about a military, what do you call it? There was called the NSC Principles Committee. It was a advisory group put together under the Obama administration in terms how would they respond to Russian invasion of a NATO country. And because the main challenge for the US was identified as the need to go up the escalation ladder, but the US would not want to directly attack Russia because this could end up in a nuclear exchange and end of the world. However, striking Belarus would be a good way of, with nuclear weapons that is, would be a good way of escalating, but still giving Russia the option of not going into full nuclear exchange. So in this war scenario, which was also described in the Atlantic, this NSC Principles Committee, it recommended, sorry, I have it here, it's they recommended a nuclear attack on Belarus, and the justification, and this is a quote, attack on Belarus, a nation that had played no role whatsoever in the invasion of a NATO country, but had the misfortune of being a Russian ally. So this was seen as the war game. So the advice. So nuke Belarus just for being an ally to Russia. So this is also why they see Belarus as being their main ally and part of their union state. That is important to signal to the West that if you continue to escalate, we will attack Belarus. This will be considered an attack on Russia as well. So it's this is often compared to a game of chicken, because we're in a game of chicken. It's very important to signal that if you continue to go straight ahead, so will we, and we will go into we will have this triggers which will set off a larger war. And it's a great shame we don't we have this myth now that the Russians do not retaliate. But the problem is this myth coexists with the idea that everything Russia does is unprovoked. It happens in a vacuum. This is why we don't see their retaliations and escalations as being in response. I often make the point that in 2014, when we toppled the government in Ukraine, they responded by taking back Crimea. This was a retaliation. In 2022, they had asked for implementing the Minsk agreement, and we didn't do that. They asked for getting security guarantees from NATO. We said no to that. What was the consequence? Well, they retaliated and went in with their military. And when the West began to send a lot of weapons into Ukraine and sabotage the peace agreement and armed Ukraine, well, what did Russia do? It annexed 4 of their oblasts. So, but we always, in our narrative, this always happens in a vacuum, because we can't say that it was provoked, because then this could be interpreted as legitimizing or justifying what Russia has done. So we always pretend as if these things happen in a vacuum. But if we do that, we also end up with this myth that everything is that Russia doesn't actually respond to retaliations. And yeah, just as a final point, this is the main problem, because as we continue to go up the escalation ladder and send heavier and heavier weapons, the main dilemma for Russia is, what is it supposed to do? If it retaliates, it risks World War III. If it doesn't retaliate, it emboldens NATO, as we, again, read in our media every day. We don't have to fear Russia anymore. They're too afraid of us. They always have red lines. We step over them. There's no consequence. We can do what we want. So they're quite aware that this is how that their restraint is being interpreted now as a weakness. So there's a huge pressure now to escalate and to retaliate, and that's why I think this change in the nuclear doctrine is considered a final warning, that if you cross this line, then we will be in war. They might not send a nuclear attack on NATO, but they will begin, I think, to attack and target NATO targets. This could be anything from starting to shoot down American drones, striking some British ships, taking out some satellites which are used to guide these missiles, which are used to attack Russia, take out logistics centers, airfields in Romania or Poland. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of steps on the escalation ladder before nuclear weapons begin to drop on the United States, of course. But the problem is, once we're in a direct war, it's going to be very, very difficult to control. We're going to go very quickly up this escalation ladder, and we're not going to be able to control this. So this is extremely dangerous. And again, I wish there was a different discourse in the West, because all I see is we shouldn't, if we bow to Russia's pressure, we are enabling a mad dictator to throw around, to wave his nuclear stick, and this is nuclear blackmail. So our moral obligation is to ignore it and continue straight ahead into the abyss. It's a absolutely absurd narrative we have, but this is where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Deason, for that, quite frankly, terrifying analysis, but I think it's very true. And the next speaker who we have coming after you, I think, can cooperate what you're saying. His name is Professor Steve Starr. He's a professor at the University of Missouri. He's a former director of the University of Missouri Clinical Laboratory Science. And thank you so much, Steve Starr. I mean, he's been a regular on here, an expert in nuclear weapons. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Let me share my screen with y'all. As Glenn mentioned, there's been a lack of understanding, I think, but it's led to a complete absence of fear of nuclear war. And I teach a class on nuclear weapons at the University of Missouri. I find that my students have little or no knowledge of this. I think after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it just stopped being taught in all of our public schools. And this ignorance, I think, is reflected in our political leadership now. And it's, we've talked about the unthinkable thing of nuclear war, and nobody seems to think about it or even understand it. But, in 1961, President Kennedy warned the world at the United Nations that a nuclear sword of Damocles hang over the head of all people and nations. And it's been like that, but that's been forgotten. You know, the idea of mutual assured destruction seems to have been replaced with this idea of, as Glenn mentioned, the moral imperative of, not bowing to nuclear blackmail from Russia. So my purpose in this presentation is just to remind people of what nuclear war is and what it would mean. This is a picture of the atomic bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki, the mushroom cloud. And this is what Nagasaki looked like shortly thereafter. That was a 15 kiloton or 15,000 ton equivalent explosive. But any nuclear weapon is like a piece of the sun. You know, it creates solar temperatures. A chemical explosion from a high explosive might be 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But at the moment of detonation, a nuclear bomb, even an atomic bomb, creates temperatures of 100 million degrees Fahrenheit. The surface of the fireball is hotter than the surface of the sun, so anyone beneath it will be vaporized. But the bombs we have now are much more powerful than the bombs that we began with in 1945. This is a comparative pictures of a 15 kiloton weapon detonated over New York City. It's the same map, but you can see the strategic nuclear weapon. Russia has about 250 or 300 of these 800 kiloton warheads that it's at launch ready status. On an average weather day, they will set about 152 square miles on fire. That's 394 square kilometers. So anything in the fire zone is not going to survive. There's going to be temperatures above the boiling point of water in about 10 minutes. Hurricane force winds will blow in from the periphery, powerful enough to uproot trees. Asphalt roads will melt. Anyone even in a deep shelter will be cooked. Oxygen's used up. This is one weapon. Now, imagine if hundreds or thousands of those are detonated. This is what happens. This is an image of a nuclear fireball. Dr. Theodore Postel and I co-authored an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists called "What Would Happen If an 800 kiloton Weapon Was Detonated Over Manhattan." The fireball, after 1 second, is about a mile in diameter. The surface of it is hotter than the surface of the sun. Within tens of minutes, it sets fires over this 150 square mile area. All the fires will converge into one giant firestorm. And this creates enormous amounts of black carbon soot because there's enormous amounts of petroleum-based products, in all urban areas now, and they will be ignited. Well, Dr. Postel also created another set of slides. I think they may have been seen on this program, but if you look at the very smallest circle over there, that's a 10 kiloton weapon. That's slightly smaller than the Hiroshima bomb. And it moves on up to the 475 kiloton weapon are the size of the weapons that the U.S. have at launch-ready status in their Ohio-class subs. And a 100 megaton weapon is what Russia has created now in its Poseidon drone torpedoes. These are powered by nuclear engines. They have almost unlimited range. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see Dr. Postel compared it with the Tsar Bomba, which was a 100 megaton weapon. That was detonated right before the nuclear test ban treaty took place. They put a lead jacket on it that actually restricted the yield to 57 megatons. This is a Belgorod sub that carries these, that has been deployed. And this is an image of the Tsar Bomba being detonated in the Soviet Union. Pictures are probably taken from 50 or 60 miles away.
Вторая отраженная ударная волна. Постепенно порывы сконденсировавшейся за фронтом ударной волны рассеиваются, раскаленное облако уходит вверх, увлекая за собой гигантский пылевой столб.
Dr. Postel created this image of what 6 of these detonations from the one sub would create, how the yellow zones would be ignited, many thousands of square miles in each detonation. So this isn't even like from ICBMs. This is just from one submarine. Princeton created this next video. It was created before the Ukraine war. If I was going to do the video now, I would create it with the beginning with a massive launch of NATO missiles and drones, after following a Russian a big aero attack into Ukraine. I think part of what Putin was warning about, this new change in doctrine, was because Russia is on the verge of breaking through all the lines in Ukraine, and they have like 700,000 troops on the border. And if they go in full in, there's going to be a lot of calls from NATO to retaliate. And if they do that, then I think this is the scenario where the nuclear retaliation is going to be envisioned. But this begins with a tit-for-tat exchange of nuclear weapons. And shows how the war could escalate. Russia launches a nuclear warning shot from a base near the city of Kaliningrad. NATO retaliates with a single tactical nuclear airstrike, while using a B-61 weapon. We have about 100 of those based there at 5 NATO member states right now. The B-61 is a variable yield weapon. It can be sub-kiloton range, the B-61-12s, or it can go up to 50 kilotons. It would be 3 to 4 times larger than the Hiroshima weapon. Putin said that Russian tactical nuclear weapons have a yield of 75 kilotons. There's an escalation. Russia sends 300 nuclear warheads through aircraft and short-range missiles to hit NATO bases. NATO responds with approximately 180 nuclear warheads via aircraft. 2.8 million people are going to die as a result of these strikes. Syrup destroyed, NATO launches a strategic nuclear strike of 600 warheads from U.S. land and submarine-based missiles aimed at Russian nuclear forces. Before losing its weapon systems, Russia launches on morning. The strike was primarily aimed at counterforce targets, military targets in the U.S. and Russia. Counter value means you attack cities. This is a final strike against the 30 most populated cities and economic centers, using 5 to 10 warheads on each city, depending on population size. The immediate casualties are over 85 million killed. And all this can take place in a matter of 72 minutes at the most. So that's the immediate death toll, but the burning soot from the cities will rise up. The black carbon soot acts as a solar collector, and the sun's rays strike it, and it quickly rises into the stratosphere above cloud level where it can't be rained out. There's high winds in the stratosphere in a matter of, maybe 10 days. The well, actually 30% of the light will be blocked in the northern hemisphere and 35% in the southern hemisphere. But that's enough to prevent up to a decade. Daily average temperatures in Central North America and Central Eurasia will fall below freezing every day for up to 3 years. So, not many land animals are going to survive this sort of scenario. There's never been a public discussion or even acknowledgement of the dangers of nuclear winter by any of the leaders of nuclear weapons states. I wrote an article for the Federation of Atomic Scientists some time ago. They removed it from their website, but one of my friends, Greg Mello, who runs the Los Alamos Study Group, had a friend that was in touch with the group that makes the decisions on nuclear policy and nuclear guidance, and they said, "No, we don't believe in nuclear winter. That's just a false theory." And I don't know. I'll finish with the slide that I start with. I just don't think there are any political or national goals that are worth risking the destruction of the human race. We've had this nuclear arsenals hanging over the head of humanity for 60 or 70 years now. And we keep playing, now we're back to playing nuclear chicken again. We had a chance to eliminate the arsenals in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union, but instead we pursued this neocon vision of world unipolar hegemony. And look at where it got us. We want to fight a war with Russia now, and all these fools in Washington think that they can make Russia back down. But nobody wants to acknowledge that the risks of nuclear war are, existential. So I'll go back and I'll stop sharing my screen, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Steve Starr, for that. I think it's very important that people do understand what a nuclear war really means. There is no such thing as winning a limited nuclear war, which is what many of these people in various political establishment places are trying to convince people that they can do. That's completely nuts, as you just demonstrated right now. So thank you so much, Professor Steve Starr, for doing this. Next, I'd like to have on, pardon me if I mispronounce your name, Dr. Faraz Sidwa. He's a trauma surgeon and a fellow at the American College of Surgeons. He recently is getting back from a trip from the Gaza Strip and will be giving a report on what he experienced there, which is, I think, still very important to keep this in the forefront as people know what's happening in Lebanon. This also can escalate into a nuclear confrontation. Israel does have nuclear weapons, and this is connected very much so within the Middle East with other nations that have nuclear weapons. So thank you so much, Dr. Sidwa, for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, my name is Faraz Sidwa. I'm a trauma surgeon out in California. I think, unlike in the academic world, being a fellow of the American College of Surgeons doesn't actually mean anything, just so everybody knows. Just pretty much every surgeon is an American College of Surgeons fellow. But yeah, I was in Gaza from March 25th to April 8th, and I've been doing some advocacy work as much as I can since I've gotten back. The situation in Gaza is it's still very bad, obviously. Gazans are still starving, including starving to death. The UN just reported that entire segments of Gaza received literally no food deliveries from humanitarian organizations in all of August. And quite frankly, all of Gaza has been destroyed at this point. 70% of housing has been destroyed. Oxfam reports that 80 to 90% of the what's called wash infrastructure, water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure has been destroyed. And then the population has been concentrated to such a degree that there's even in the humanitarian safe zone, there's approximately one toilet for every 4,000 people. So these are the current estimate is that excuse me, sorry, I was on call overnight, I'm a little bit tired. The current estimates are that there are about 4 liters of water per person per day in Gaza, and that's not for drinking, that's for literally all purposes, drinking, cooking, cleaning, everything, far below the 15 liters that's recommended in a humanitarian emergency by the SPHERE standards. But just to tie into what the last two speakers spoke about, it's now that Israel is clearly deliberately escalating the war in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And people are pretty frank about that. I haven't really seen anybody deny that it's the Israelis doing the escalation and that they're doing it on purpose. They're just playing this same game again with this ceasefire nonsense that they did with Gaza, where they tell the Biden administration that, oh yeah, we're on board with the ceasefire, and then it's announced publicly, and then they just all of a sudden about face. There was just a long article on an Israeli news program, which was then picked up by the Times of Israel, talking about how Netanyahu decided while on his plane coming to the UN to speak in New York that he decided to reverse his position on the ceasefire proposal that the U.S. and France had already worked out. And this is extremely dangerous. It's a very odd phenomenon. I don't know. I find it hard to believe that the U.S. government hasn't figured out yet that Benjamin Netanyahu is a dishonest person. So why they keep listening to what he says, I just can't understand. But it's really dangerous. You know, the U.S. is, my understanding, and I'm no military expert, but my understanding is that the U.S.'s the ability to produce munitions and things like that is really being quite strained by the supply to Ukraine and the massive, just enormous supply to the daily resupply to Israel. And Israel is just using these munitions with wild abandon. Israel dropped more munitions on Gaza in the first few months than the U.S. did in the first 10 years of the Iraq War. It's just utterly outrageous use of weaponry, which explains the massive destruction and death. But these things can all lead to a situation where, like Dr. Starr and Dr. Deason mentioned, this can lead to a situation where the possibility of nuclear war really does begin to raise its head. And I don't know what the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists doomsday clock is set to. The last time I checked, I think it was 90 seconds. It's a very, very dangerous time. And it's stemming largely from these two crises, which are entirely American-made: Gaza and Ukraine. I'm no activist, unfortunately, and I'm no analyst. But it's if the United States' posture in these places and its goals and its willingness to push those goals beyond limits that we used to have are not put back in check, the world is really in for a real bad situation.
Thank you, Dr. Sidwa. I was actually just grabbing a leaflet, which we've been distributing with your statement and Dr. Perlmutter, who you collaborate with as well, at the UN, which many people, if you were on last week, you know that our organizers who were distributing what you just heard at the UN, talking with diplomats, had those leaflets seized, and they were being prevented from distributing this, which was, I mean, you want to talk about censorship. I mean, literally people on the street reading something that was really wild. So there's another follow-up statement. I'll find the link for that and post that in the chat here, and make sure that people have it so you can get it out and distribute it yourself as well. This is obviously important enough they want to shut it down. So thank you very much, Dr. Sidwa, for what you're doing and what you and Perlmutter have been doing and going around and being a witness to a genocide, and letting the world know what's really going on. So thank you for that. Okay, so next I'm going to go over to Dennis Small, who's going to introduce our next speaker from Argentina. Why don't you go ahead, Dennis?
Okay, very good. Before doing that, let me just add a sentence to what you were just saying about this statement at the United Nations. There is, in the words of Dr. Perlmutter, and this is a quote from him, which matches exactly what we just heard from Dr. Sidwa, quote, "I was at ground zero on 9/11. I was at the earthquake the day that it hit in Haiti and went back 4 more times. I was at Katrina the day that the hurricane hit dirt. and I've done 40 surgical missions in austere environments on 4 continents. When you combine all of that experience, none of it touches what I saw in Gaza, close quote. So this is exactly what the censors want people to not know. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Jorge Rashid of Argentina. He is a medical doctor. He's an advisor to the province of Buenos Aires in Argentina. He is also one of the founding group of the Argentine and Latin American chapter of the International Peace Coalition. I think this is the first chapter of this sort that we have. I think it's an excellent example for others to follow. Mr. Rashid will be reading the short statement which they prepared, and then has a few additional comments, including an extremely important announcement as to who some of the sponsors and supporters of this statement are. So, Jorge, if you would proceed, please.
Muchas gracias a
Thank
todos.
you
Un abrazo
very much to all of you. A warm embrace to Dr. Shinwer. A group of Argentinian doctors are also getting ready to travel to Gaza. We will be heading there shortly. We have created the Argentine and Latin American chapter of the International Peace Coalition, which has issued the statement that I will now read to you, and after that I will add some comments. As citizens concerned about the evolution of the international situation, facing the possibility of a world war of thermonuclear characteristics, which would lead humanity to a final Holocaust, we constitute ourselves as a unified voice, almost a cry that serves as a barrier against the irresponsible advances of the unipolar, imperial, and warlike world. In their effort to try to preserve their hegemony and world colonization, the United States, Israel, England, the European Union, and NATO intend to use the wars to advance towards Eurasia and to try to stop the trade and economic advances of the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Asian International Investment Bank, the NDB, the BRICS Bank, and they also want to halt the land and maritime Silk Roads, the Arctic route, which they have lost in recent decades due to the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, as we speak of that, as well as the bombing of Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Yemen by the State of Israel, distorted and falsified along with the fascist Nazi experiment in Ukraine and the arming of Taiwan to provoke China, are elements that we Argentines are aware of, despite the manipulated, distorted, and falsified information that we in Argentina and Latin America receive, which marks a turning point of this world war in installments, as Pope Francis has been denouncing. The Global South has always been a region of peace, which has maintained a position of bringing to the heart of the nations of the world a word of dialogue and respect for the self-determination of peoples without interference or unilateral sanctions by the powers which have been hegemonic to date. In our country, Argentina, this situation is aggravated by having a government which is legitimate in its origin, but is illegitimate in the actions it has taken with impunity. It is subjecting us to unipolar geopolitics, which makes us participants in a possible coming conflict, especially due to the strategic geopolitical location of Argentina in the South Atlantic, the Antarctic, and the bi-oceanic passes, which are vital for the NATO, the U.S. Fifth Fleet, and their strategic designs. The Argentine government of Milei publicly supports the genocide in Gaza and is trying to move the Argentine embassy to Jerusalem, is sending arms to Zelensky in Ukraine, and participates in joint operations with the colonial powers on top of insulting Latin America's popular leaders, turns its back on the world and subjects the Argentine people to its so-called adjustment policies, which they insist is needed in order to honor the debt, in quote marks, which are the chains that maim the the dependent countries. We call on Latin American patriots to join together and rally to defend peace and solidarity, that is, of all human beings, as well as the environmental care of nature in our region, which could be razed to the ground in a nuclear world war. This is the statement that was prepared, which has been read already by some 50 leading Argentinian intellectuals, led primarily by Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a man who has dedicated his entire life from the decade of the 70s against genocide and for building peace. Argentina and Latin America are clearly under colonial pressure, under attack by the United States, as we see what is going on with Petro and the campaign against Mexico and its new President Sheinbaum and slanders of current President Obrador. All of this is happening in Latin America, and what is going on in the Middle East, clearly by the United States and its coalition, the so-called Christian West, as they call it, which is such a small part of a world of 6.8 billion people who are on the other side of the planet. They want to keep 650 million Latin Americans as their backyard. This coalition, this peace coalition, I wish to thank Dennis very much, and also Helga, for her new architecture for peace and development, which is extremely urgent. The unipolar world should learn to share the destiny of a multipolar world, non-intervention, and a permanent commitment by all peoples to hold trade without resort to invasions, weapons, and colonization, which has been occurring in Latin America. In conclusion, I wish to tell you that the main spokesperson of this policy is General Laura Richardson, who is threatening to break any ties that the region has with Russia and China, and has this is an expression of the multinational hedge funds, starting with BlackRock, Vanguard, and MDL. This is what is happening in Argentina, and this is why I feel it is very important that we have so many adherents to our call, and I thank you deeply, all of you, beginning with Dennis, who have been sharing this information, the important information that we are sharing with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thank you for organizing a chapter in Argentina and getting excellent support for that. This is a very good development, and I would encourage other people, please contact us if you also would like to start a chapter of the International Peace Coalition. I think we can continue mobilizing in this way. I just wanted to say, so Nick Brana is still stuck in the middle of a meeting. He's the co-founder of Rage Against the War Machine. They're holding a massive demonstration in DC this weekend to stop nuclear war. I'll post the link inside the chat here, and hopefully we'll be able to get him on. He's trying to hop over as soon as possible. But I think before we move on to the discussion period, I wanted to ask Helga Sepp-LaRouche for your response to what's been brought forward today.
Well, I want to thank all the speakers who have contributed extremely important aspects. And I can only say that, the information about what a nuclear war would mean is at this point probably the most important information to spread around the world, because if I'm absolutely certain if people would know in what mortal danger they exist, they would absolutely not tolerate this. So I'm asking all the participants of this meeting to make sure that you take the video material of this session and get it out widely. I think also what was reported about the actual situation in Gaza, if people would know, I mean, Gaza in a certain sense has almost dropped off the headlines, at least in terms of what the genocide going on every day concerns. So I think, I also welcome the idea that chapters of the IPC be set up, because I think it is more urgent than ever before to unify the peace movement. It's still not, there's still a lot of division naturally, actually spread by forces of the empire who like to have the forces divided in order to control them. So I think the idea that a global war would cause, destruction in the southern hemisphere, this is why I think the countries of the global south must be awakened too, because as I think it was either President Sukarno or Nehru who already warned at the Bandung conference in 1955 that if ever comes to a nuclear war, the countries of the global south may die a little bit later, maybe 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, but they will die anyhow. So it is a matter which, I think, and that is actually, in my view, the one element which is not yet calculated into the equation. If the countries of the global south would have a way of speaking out more loudly, they are the majority. They clearly have taken the moral leadership, as was demonstrated by the action of South Africa in Den Haag. So I think I would ask all of you to help us to make sure that this discussion is being spread, especially in the countries of the global south, and that we bring as many of them or their representatives to the next IPC discussions.
Yes, thank you very much, Helga. And I'll just make a few points just before we go into the discussion period and I pass the torch. One, I know that there are sister demonstrations for this Saturday, and we do have one in Sweden, which is very wonderful. I know there are other people who are working on demonstrations. Please let me know when, where, and who to contact so we can help you promote those, which is wonderful. Even if it's not on Saturday, if it's Sunday or the following week and you'd like it to be part of this general mobilization to stop World War III, I am happy to help you. We all are happy to help you distribute this and build up these demonstrations. We need them as fast as possible. Secondly, if you'd like to co-stream, there are people who have been co-streaming this on their own platforms. Please let us know. We are happy to share this content. We are not greedy. We think it's important that this information is widely spread and the mobilization is spread throughout many different nations, languages, and ideologies. So please just contact me or the Schiller Institute, and we're happy to help you do that. Okay, so we're going to move on into the discussion period now. And if you'd like to join the discussion period, like I said before, you must be registered. If you're on YouTube, go into the description area and you will find the link to RSVP and you'll be given the Zoom link. If you are on another platform, please go to the schillerinstitute.com, and at the top of the website, you will see the RSVP page. Select that and you will get the link there. So thank you, all the people who are on this platform right now on Zoom, and we're going to switch over to the discussion period now.